Hi, my name is Beatrice Moyes. I go by B. Moyes. I am a board-certified cognitive specialist in Charlotte, North Carolina. And my area of specialty is special needs, and I do a lot of work on special needs siblings. The reason that that's my area of specialty is I have a 8-year-old autistic son, Jacob, who is nonverbal, and I have a 6-year-old daughter, Abigail. And Abby is the reason that I started to do a lot of work with siblings. Back in Charlotte, I do a lot of group work for individuals that are on the spectrum, but I also do a lot of sibling work, and we also call them sib shops, because siblings are often neglected when it comes to special needs, because the special needs child requires so much attention that we don't really necessarily pay attention to the sibling because we think they're going to be okay. So back in Charlotte, North Carolina, I do a lot of sib work and siblings, and I love working with siblings. I like working with the younger ones because they're so innocent in what they say and their expectations, but I also love working with the older kids because their level of empathy is so great and what they have to contribute. And they can also give me an insight into kind of like Abby's future. You know, what to look for, what to talk about, the expectations, because sometimes we catch things a little too late. So this is Jake and Abby, right there. And they're, you know, the reason I do what I do. So siblings of special needs. Siblings of children with disabilities are at greater risk than average of developing emotional issues, anxiety, and stress. These problems are known as internalizing issues not visible and may be an attempt by sibling to hide their problems. They may not be well behaved or protect their overly burdened parents. And this is my first slide because this is the reason I do what I do. We have no idea the amount of stress that these siblings are under, and they don't necessarily know how to say that they're under stress because they typically do want to protect their parents, and they don't want to add on to what is already a very stressful situation. So they just internalize it all. My colleagues see siblings for anxiety and all these different things, and it's not necessarily they have a medical diagnosis or psychological diagnosis. It's really due to the overwhelming burden and stress of dealing with a child that has other needs that is greater than theirs. So some of the things that you want to do as a parent are, let's talk about some goals. The number one goal is communication. Siblings don't tend to talk about the issues that they are having. They don't like to overburden parents, like I said before, and they sometimes don't necessarily have the words to tell you what they're feeling or how they're feeling. Especially the younger ones, it's always in behavior. Younger kids always tend to respond negative with behavior, tantruming, meltdowns, hitting, kicking, anything that looks like this is just a bad child for attention. That's usually how younger kids address it. Older kids tend to shut down and not communicate and withdraw. They tend to go to their room, always have some kind of gathering outside of the home. They're just trying to escape the situation in general. So younger kids act behaviorally. Older kids, it's still behavior, but it's internalized as far as removal from the selves of the situation or the environment in general. So you cannot hide special needs from sibling, nor can you pretend that it is not affecting their child, like it's not affecting them. That's unrealistic. If you have a child with a disability, the disability is part of the family dynamic. So trying to pretend like it's not there or it doesn't exist doesn't do anyone any good. It doesn't do your child any good, and it definitely doesn't do the sibling any good. Not everything special needs is bad, and by not communicating openly regarding the situation does inadvertently send a bad message. We are very pro-autism in my house. We've always have been. Before I started doing this work, I've been working over 12 years with kids on the spectrum, and Jacob's only 8. So I was gifted a child with autism for my work because it just brought a whole different level of awareness because I used to talk about it and I didn't know it. So I knew it intellectually, I knew it academically, I did a lot of research on it, I understood it very well, I have 2 masters in it, but in actuality, I didn't experience it or live it, or really knew what it was to have a kid with special needs, or what the stress that it took on the family as a whole, on me and my husband's relationship, and then of course, how it would affect our other child. Jake and Abby are 23 months apart. Jacob has the autism where he was developing typically, and then he regressed. So it's called regressive autism. So he had all these milestones that he was hitting, and by the time he was 3 years old, he lost language and everything that comes with regressive autism. So it's kind of like we had a child, and then that child was abruptly taken away from us, and then we have a new child. And that is not something you necessarily can plan for as a parent. And that is not something, because at that point we already had Abby. So we didn't know what her life would look like now that this child is here and now he's autistic and then he's going to require all of these different needs. But we've never ever presented it as autism is bad or special needs is bad or having a child with what we call unique talents and unique strength as bad, because even though he is not neurotypical, which neurotypical is anyone that is not affected by any type of neurological issues, doesn't mean he's not normal or he's not fine or everything that, behaviorally come, our way is bad. So we never look at special needs as a bad thing. It's just a different way of learning something else. You have to allow siblings to tell you how they feel about the child with special needs. One of the things that we did yesterday in my SIB shop was basically we talked about what is it that you don't like? Name something that's bad. The younger kids were kind of like, no, it's good. There's nothing bad about it initially. But eventually they started to kind of say, well, I don't like, apparently there's a lot of singing happening and apparently that is not a very good thing. So that is something that was shared. There was a lot of singing and they don't like the singing. And another thing that was happening or is happening in your household is there's a lot of nakedness going on. A lot of people running around naked. So I told the kids I will bring up the nakedness and the singing, and sometimes there's naked singing, so very interesting. But you have to allow kids to share something that they feel like is not a good thing. And as a parent, the number one thing we do when a child brings up a concern, we immediately solve. Oh, I don't like da-da-da. Oh, well, here's what you're supposed to do. And after we try to solve, then we excuse. They're doing this because. My child is doing this because. Your brother is doing this because. His life is going to look different than yours. Your life is going to look different. All these different things. And kids are not really interested in the solution, and they're not interested in you trying to troubleshoot it. They really just want to be heard. They really do. They just want you to sit there and listen to their concern. And sometimes you don't even have to say anything or try to come up with a solution to the problem. That's not what they're looking for. They just want to be heard. They just want to feel like they're an active member of the family as well. Depending on the age, they may not realize how this will impact their life long term. So my younger kids typically will think that the special needs sibling will grow out of this, or they will have a life that is different than the actual life that these kids will have, or now these adults. One of the things that Abby does all the time, she's 6 years old, she talks about Jacob going away to college. She's like, when Jacob goes away to college, it'll be so nice because I'll be an only child. I said, really? She's like, yeah, it'll just be me, you, and daddy. And then we can do stuff together as a family, just the 3 of us. But then we can go visit Jacob. Will Jacob have an apartment? Will he live alone? Like, she starts asking questions that in her mind, he's going to have this life like a neurotypical child. And she also says, hey, when Jacob's older, he will start speaking. He will start talking. I know he doesn't talk right now because he has the autism. She calls it the autism. But when he's older, he's going to start talking, and then him and I, we can start talking together, and then we can play together. So her idea of what his life will be is very different than what it will actually be, because she's 6 years old. And I understand that she's 6 years old. Developmentally, that's just where she's at. And that is just where she's supposed to be. There's no need for me to address and talk about, no, this is not what it's going to be. No, this is how Jacob's life's really going to look like. It's not really necessary. So I allow it, and we have that conversation. However, when I have older kids, they're more realistic. And they understand what this is long term. But they may not understand what it is long term for them. Because at some point, they may have to take on the caregiver role. Depending on the age, some kids get that, but others do not. So talking to your child about realistically what that role looks like moving forward is a very important conversation, because in reality, they will be the caregiver. That is just the nature of this game. And we have to be honest and open, not necessarily to stress them out about it by giving them an information that they may not, need right now, but just kind of prepare them softly to know that this is the conversation. So when they do have concerns and when they do want to talk to you about, hey, what do I do with this? What about that? What about this? What about that? They can go back and forth and have an open dialogue with you. Another thing is information. Having an open communication is important, but be mindful about the information that you're giving. Again, not everything needs to be said or given based on the child's age. Now, when we're talking about the 18 and up crew, that's different. That's no longer a child, and you can have a completely different conversation with expectations, reality, anything that is serious, you can have that conversation. But when children are under 18 and they're still in school and they have the stress of school, peer pressure, social stress, all these different things going on, giving them too much information about their current situation as much as it is their reality, it really doesn't help them. It just creates more stress, and it creates more anxiety on a very stressful and anxiety situation already. There's several books that you can get that will provide you, appropriate ways to give information. And this is a website. I'm sure this will be somewhere you guys can upload. Just to kind of give you an idea of how to talk to kids, what to say to kids, and also the child age is very important. Developmentally, kids change every year. So 0 to 1 is different, 1 to 2 is different, 3 to 4 is different. Psychologically, we like to group them, 5 and under, we put them here. 6, we do that, we group them as a general, but really kids, each developmental year is different than the one before. So they may not be mentally capable of handling certain things. Another thing we were able to discuss in my group earlier yesterday was, with the younger kids, fairness and balance. Here's the thing. When you have a child with special needs, it isn't fair. It's not. It's not fair to the sibling, and it isn't something that we can make fair, because we're in a situation that, quite frankly, no one really signed up for. We just got. And because you just received this, you have to make the best of it. It doesn't mean it's a bad situation. That's just what it is. So you don't have to make things fair, but you do have to try and make things balanced. And there's a difference. When you're trying to make things fair, you're trying to make things equitable and the same, and you can't. Like certain kids, you can't punish. So another thing I was told to bring up was punishment and discipline and the lack of it that's happening. And they don't necessarily understand, just because you see that something should be punished doesn't mean the child, the special needs child, will respond to that punishment the way that they think they should respond to it. I was told to talk about electronics and how it should be monitored severely, especially with YouTube and music, back to the music. And if the special needs child does something bad, take away the YouTube, that will solve everything. That is their perception, because this is them parenting, thinking this is what you do, and if you guys just take away the YouTube, problem solved. To a child, that would be fair. That does seem fair, like, okay, they did something, now they got their punishment. But in reality, it's really not a punishment, especially if this is their only form of socialization. If this is a way that they connect to the world, if this is a thing that brings them joy, you as a parent, because there's so very few little things that bring your child joy, you're not going to take that away. You don't feel like that would be a thing to do. Like, it just wouldn't make sense to take away this one little bit of joy that they have. So how do you create balance? Balance is you can decrease the amount of time that they would get on the YouTube channel. That way the child feels like, okay, now they're not on it for 5 hours, they only have 3 hours. But that creates a sense of balance, because again, we're talking about special needs siblings and their need to be accepted and loved and be understood and heard. So when you're thinking about how do I punish the special needs child, sometimes you do have to do something just to create a sense of balance. When the sibling takes on that caregiver role, it is a lot easier to be a caregiver to someone you don't resent than someone you've been feeling like they've been a burden your entire life. And that's the role, honestly, that we're preparing them for, even though that's not the role they signed up for. So when I think, like, Jacob also does the naked thing, I discovered there's a lot of similarities between autism and Coolie kids, because Jacob does like the singing and the nakedness. And one of the ways we have justified the nakedness, he is not allowed out of the bathroom without clothing. Like this, that's just, he cannot get out the bathroom without having something on his person, because he does like to just waltz around from room to room, and it's like, oh, this is just, and he'll stand in front of the window, and I'm thinking, this is just not good. I mean, this is just bad. But the new rule is he has to put something on before getting out of the bathroom. That, to Abby, is fair. It's fair. Now, he is 8 years old. He should not be doing that. She doesn't. She hasn't done that since she was 2, you know? So that isn't fair. And the expectation for him to really socially understand what's happening, that's not fair to him, because he can't. He can't. But I also can't explain that to a 6-year-old. But what I can do is create a sense of fairness and balance by giving him a rule and giving him something that he can actually do, so she doesn't feel like it's just Jacob, he doesn't get any punishment or rules or anything, and everything's about her. We have a lot of household responsibilities in our home, and it's always based on what each child can do. Abby obviously can do a lot more than Jacob can. Jacob's job every morning is to wake up and open all the blinds in the house. That is his job, that is his responsibility, and for him, especially, routine helps. So to him, having something that he does every single day, and it's the same thing, and ironically, sometimes it's a cloudy day, and he's like, whatever. This is just my job. Like, you don't need to open the windows, but he does it anyway, the blinds. That is his job. That's his responsibility. Abby has her job and her responsibility. The goal is never for it to look perfect or good. It's just for him to try and for him to get a sense of, I feel good about myself. When you have a child with limited verbal capabilities, we often dismiss their internal feeling of how they feel about themselves and their self-esteem, and we don't realize how impactful it is for them to accomplish something that may be so simple to someone else. Again, Abby could open the blinds easily and wouldn't open them if it's a cloudy day, but to Jake, this is a time for him to shine. This is a moment. And for Abby, she gets to see that he is responsible for something as well. So assign work that each child can do independently without your help, but also so that the other sibling doesn't feel like they're doing everything and they're overly burdened, and then the special needs child is not doing anything. So, one-on-one time. I have a couple of different times of one-on-one time. One I call bonus time, and the other one I call one-on-one time. Bonus time is time that you basically earn for no apparent reason whatsoever. Like sometimes it's just, we're sitting around together and I'll just say, Abby, you and I are gonna go for a walk. That is a bonus time. We were already together. We were already like in the family doing something, but then I just take her for a walk. Another thing about Jake, he has front lobe epilepsy. So he has a medical condition. So because he has epilepsy require immediate attention. It isn't something that you can say, okay, he's having a seizure, so I'll give it a few and then come back to it in a moment. The world stops and every attention is given to Jake when something like this is happening. Because he has epilepsy, we have hospital stays every year. Abby looks at that time as a special time that Jacob and I get to spend together at the hospital when we get room service, and then we have all these maids coming in the room, and then it's just fun, and it's a beautiful time. And ironically, the Charlotte Levine Children's Hospital, we always we request this room, but we get the room where there's a helicopter landing. So she's thinking there's a helicopter landing happening, and we've seen it a couple of times. Jacob likes it. It looks fun. I mean, objectively, it just looks like a really good time. She doesn't see the teeny tiny little bed, that's not even a bed, the couch, that I'm like sleeping on with like overnight, that's so uncomfortable, and all the wirings on Jacob's head, and the fact that he can't move very much. But she just sees that we are gone for 2-3 nights, depending on how many episodes he has, and it's just him and I. So she sees that as one-on-one time. And to create another sense of, again, balance, I have to give her that type of time. And it's easier to do because we only have 2 kids. So for us, I can always just say, okay, my husband take Jake, and then I do this with Abby, and then sometimes we reverse it. That's easier to do. When you have more than 1 kid, it's harder. It is. It's a lot harder to do because sometimes you can't do that. We have, in the past, hire a babysitter so Abby can get 2-parent time, where Jake stays with someone and then Abby just gets 2 parents, because Jacob takes up a lot of air. He takes up a lot of air in our family. Every decision that we make is centered around whether or not we can do this because of Jacob. My husband, he loves Utah. It's so pretty. We've never been here before. He's like, this is such a pretty city. We should move here. And then I said, first of all, his neurologist is not here, so that's not happening. His ABA therapist is not here. That can't happen. His psychologist is not here. That can't happen. Like the list of things that why we can't move here. And then he gets upset because he's like, right, well, we'll find new people. It took 8 years to get this team together. I'm not leaving them. You know, like we can't leave Charlotte because everything that Jacob needs is in Charlotte. So when we have one-on-one time with Abby, we're very aware of why we're doing it, because Jacob takes up so much time. One-on-one time is time that is purposeful. It is time that you actually put on your schedule, on your calendar to spend with the other sibling, and that they know that this time has been put out for them. This is their time. Bonus time is just in excess, like just something that you do. Like when Jacob's having a seizure, Abby sees that as bonus time. It's not, but that's what she sees it as. Because out of the blue, something just happening, and now we're paying attention to Jake. So for us, out of the blue, nothing happened, now we're paying attention to Abby. So that is just the bonus time that we've created. Family time. So having time without the special needs child. Again, when we take Abby, just the two of us, to do something. A lot of her time is spent in therapy, taking to and from for Jake. So we do have to be very mindful with, sometimes we do have to exclude Jacob. And he actually doesn't mind it because he gets to sit home with the iPad and he's very happy about that. So to him, it's okay. But for Abby, it is the most important thing for her because she does feel like Jacob's more important. She said it repeatedly. She's asked me, can she have autism? She's asked me repeatedly, I would like autism. When I turn 8, can I get autism? When I turn 9, then I'm like, well, you would have it by now if you're going to get it. And she's asked me, why is it that it's Jacob that have autism and she doesn't have autism? And I said, well, your dad also has autistic traits. My husband has high-functioning Asperger's. So my husband's an Aspie, or Asperger's syndrome, which no longer exists, but anyway, a lot of people know about it. And I said, so Jacob is just your dad 2.0. Like, it is just daddy on a lot of different stuff, sensory overload. So to her, the connection is the boys have it and the girls don't have it. And I'm fine with that. For now, it makes sense, and I'm okay with it. But he does take up a lot of the one-on-one family time, because sometimes if we're going to go to a restaurant, she's concerned about, is he going to behave? Will he listen? Can he eat the food? Like all these different things. And she just wants to go somewhere and eat and not worry about all of these different things that she really shouldn't have to worry about at her age. So having time without the special needs child is very important. It's not excluding them. It's really including the sibling, if that makes sense. Scheduling mommy and daddy time, which I spoke about, and bonding time to hear your child's concern. The best thing that happened yesterday with the older group, because it was an hour and a half, and to just hear their real life concerns. Some of them said some things that I didn't even think would be a concern. But they're more concerned with things that we're not aware of. They do want to know, well, what about their life long term? They want to know about safety. There's a lot of question. The older kids had a lot of question about how do we keep them safe physically, and how do we keep them from not hurting themselves? You know, like how do we know they can cross the street and not get hit by a car? How do we know that they have more sense of awareness? So you have to listen to that concern, and you may not have an answer for it. You may not have a response, but the sibling wants to know and they want to talk about it, and we have to respect that. Obviously, I'm a therapist. I love therapy. I think therapy is for everybody. Even if you don't need it, you should get it. But I love therapy. It is best for the sibling to also feel like they have someone, like they have their person, because they don't necessarily feel like the parent is on their team. They don't, because again, the special needs child takes so much energy. So they really need someone who is not biased, who can be on that person's side, on the sibling side, and let them vent. Let them, talk about their concerns, and let them talk about whatever it is that they're feeling without judgment and without defending. Because if they start to bring up their concern to you as a parent, you will defend. That is just what the nature of it, you will defend. You have to defend it, you must excuse it, and they don't necessarily need that. So it's best that you get a child a therapist that they can talk to. Older kids sometimes don't like therapy because it's a little bit awkward. You can get them a coaching advisor, someone to talk to, SIBS shops, any type of information, school guidance counselors. There's different ways that a child can communicate and talk about what they're feeling without it necessarily being inside a therapeutic setting. Sibling support. Obviously, this is what I do. This is what I love. That's what we did yesterday. The child should feel supported by their special needs sibling. So one thing that Abby does ballet. We try to dump money on her because we feel so guilty. So it's like whatever she wants, yes, you can have that. Yeah, sure, why not? And as part of that, she has a lot of activities that she has to go to. Jacob attends every single last one of those activities. He doesn't like it. He is miserable while he's doing it, especially ballet. Although this year, he was dancing a little bit, and that worried my husband. He was like, we're not doing this anymore. But I think just the repeated exposure over and over again, he's just kind of like, okay, this is just what I do. We make him bring her flowers. Again, he doesn't. Again, there's a huge social deficit with autism, so he's just like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but okay. But Abby feels supported by her brother. He is there because she's been supporting him. And she goes to every single thing pertaining to him because she doesn't have a choice. So we kind of take away his choice not to support her. So as best as you can, make sure that the siblings are supporting each other, and especially the special needs sibling is supporting the neurotypical child. Connections for siblings. I love this summit because the siblings can come and make friends and connect. One of the important things is when they do come here, make sure that you get some follow through for the siblings, that they're not just being dragged along from place to place without them connecting with another sibling that they can call or talk or, well, they won't call, that they can text or email or do something with. So make sure that when they do come here, that they're connecting with another sibling. Like if they're like, oh, I really like Mary, or, you know, Susan was really sweet. Hey, did you get her number? Did you get her email address or something? Because this is such a unique situation, and because it's a rare genetic issue, that they will not be able to connect with another kid like this necessarily in their hometown. So getting them to connect and kind of like forcing that interaction so that they can engage with one another, so that they can have someone to talk to. The older kids did a lot of, so my brother does this, does yours? So my sister does this, does yours? That was like the most, I don't know, like that was the most important thing to them. They just kept saying, who else is doing this? And who else is doing that? Who else is taking electronics apart and putting it back together? Apparently that's another thing. So that connection was so important and valuable to them. And I can tell some of my older kids were a little bit more reserved and shy, but they all opened up. So all the kids that came to both the younger and the older group, but the older group, all the ones that came to the sibling support, they all spoke. They all shared, and they all liked it and wanted to connect with another person that have a life similar to them, but on a different part of town. So make sure you're researching, you're looking into it, but also that when they're here, that they're connecting with the siblings, and you guys aren't just making the special needs connection with excluding the neurotypical connection. Okay? It's not fair. We talked about this. You can't give your child a speech about being fair. That is just, I covered this part already, but having a special needs sibling is not fair, but all you can do is try to create a sense of balance. Responsibilities. I talk about this a lot because another thing that was brought up was feeling overly burdened with household responsibilities, and the sibling feeling like they don't do, the special needs sibling don't do anything, and they do everything, and they even do picking up the slack of the special needs child. So we really have to do better and try harder to make sure that you're giving the responsibility equal share. This one is, when kids are younger, it's easy for them to interact and play because the play doesn't require a lot of social interaction. It doesn't require a lot of huge developmental restraint into it. But when they're older, there become this gap between what they can do socially and what developmentally they cannot do. So you have to start to create ways for the sibling to interact with their special needs sibling when that gap becomes greater. So your neurotypical child will keep moving along the way that they should, but your special needs child will not, because sometimes they're going to be stuck at a developmental stage. So you may have a 14-year-old that's really 8. You may have an 8-year-old that's really 2. You may have a 25-year-old that's really 13 or 14. And that becomes a lot harder because physically they're moving on, but cognitively they're not. So it becomes a lot harder for that relationship to keep going, and you have to encourage your neurotypical child to interact with the special needs child in a way that makes sense for them. So if it's a smaller game of bingo, something that may not be developmentally appropriate for the older child or the neurotypical kid, but if they can connect in some way, again, we're preparing them for the caregiver role. So they must feel like there's a greater connection for them to want to take on that role. Life lessons. The best thing that you can see in older kids is the level of compassion, empathy, and understanding that these kids naturally will get based on the situation they've been handed. This is from the Parents Club of Siblings. Every day, Andy teaches me never to give up. He knows he is different, but he doesn't focus on that. He doesn't give up. And every time I see him having a hard time, I make myself work that much harder. I don't know what I would do without Andy. He changed my life. If I had not grown up with him, I would have less understanding, patience, and compassion for people. He shows us that anyone can do anything. So this is a sibling of a special needs kid with Down syndrome, and this is what he wanted to share about what he's learned. This is from an article that I wrote, and I called it The Gift of Compassion. From the moment we discovered that my Jacob had autism, I felt sad for my daughter. I felt sorry for her. I felt guilty. Felt like she would be deprived of a typical childhood. I thought that having an autistic brother would mean that she would not have a brother with the ability to look after her, take care of her, stand up for her. I felt this great guilt and thought that she had less of a brother because he was autistic. He was not capable of playing with her like a neurotypical brother. They wouldn't have a typical type of relationship. I presumed he wouldn't be capable of having the bond that my brother and I had. He would not be proficient of teasing her or protecting her or making fun of her or be understanding to her. In the midst of all of this, I had neglected what he actually would provide. One Sunday afternoon, on a beautiful October afternoon, I sat inside watching a television show. I gazed out the window to our backyard, and I saw 2 children playing. At that moment, that is all I saw, 2 kids. Not one autistic child and his sister, just 2 kids. As I watched them play, I began to smile because it was peaceful, but also because this was just a typical and enjoyable moment. As I watched without their knowledge, I saw my daughter helping her big brother climb on the slide, encouraging him, telling him, "Come on, Jacob, you can do it." I see my baby girl having compassion that we so desperately want to teach our children. I see my 4-year-old demonstrating a level of care and understanding that most adults do not possess. I see her being patient and kind, but mostly I see her being the sister that my son needs. The daughter I want and become a person that we all would strive to be. And this was in an article that I wrote because after feeling pity and sad, I lost focus of what Abby was actually gaining from having an autistic brother, and it was the gift of compassion. So that's my talk. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Sorry, my sibling son is 10. Sorry, he's 10, and he's involved in activities, sports and things. And I remembered you talking about how it's important for the special needs child to support the sibling, what do you do when the sibling is at a point where they feel embarrassed by the special needs child, especially like when they're doing an activity? What do you do for that?
How old is the neurotypical child?
10.
Okay. So that is, because he's 10 and pre-middle school or middle school age, that is a hard time in general. And he's going to be embarrassed by everything and anything. So it's not necessarily he's embarrassed because his brother's special needs or the thing that he's doing. He's embarrassed by you. He's embarrassed by your husband. He's embarrassed by the world. Respect that for the moment, but just know that it will change. It gradually does change because it comes with a level of acceptance. Once he has accepted himself, because 10, he's going through a lot, he will be more accepting of his brother showing up and supporting him. But it's just a hard time at that age to really accept anyone else because he's 10. It's just hard.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Oh, she has a question.
Okay, so my daughter is 4, and my daughter's 4, and my son is 7, and I see the gap closing developmentally between the two of them. What's the best way for me to talk to my 4-year-old daughter about Cole having this syndrome, or what's the best way to explain it to her?
At 4, she cannot conceptualize it. And at 4, developmentally, she will not understand it because it won't make sense to her. The best way that you can explain it to her and say that our family is different and not necessarily make it about Cole, but make it about the family as a whole. Like, our family is different. We do things differently than other families. But right now, there's really not much you can tell a 4-year-old to make her understand how her brother is different, because she's just going to continue to ask. You can say it today, like, so this is what it is, these are the explanation behind it. Tomorrow, why is he different? You know, it will just be the same story over and over again, but tell her our family is different. And the families that are similar to us, when we come out here, we're similar, but our family around our friends and, you know, our neighborhood, it's different. Just make it about the family and not Cole.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm just going to put in this, maybe most people have siblings with their KDVS kids, we don't, but this applies too for friends who have children. So if you're going to be, you'll be helping them learn to relate to your child. And they will hopefully get the gift of compassion. And along with the school he's in, they will get that too. So we need to remember this is for possibly a wider community than just the siblings.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that's true.
Do you have any general advice for families that are parenting more than one special needs or kind of intense kid situation with also, you know, a typical child or children?
So one neurotypical and then the others are special needs?
So I have 3, but 2 I'd say not neurotypical, and then 1 neurotypical right now.
Okay. So is the advice more for the neurotypical child?
I was just wondering, in general, do you have anything that would
I
benefit
guess
the group?
A general umbrella thing would be structure, honestly, and having routine and schedules, because anyone that's not neurotypical thrives on structure and kind of having understanding of what's happening and what's going on and what's next, because typically non-neurotypical kids are high anxiety and high stress, and anxiety presents itself very differently in kids, so it tends to look like bad behavior or not listening or lack of cooperation or something like that. But if you can decrease the amount of anxiety they're experiencing by giving them a sense of comfort with knowing what's happening or what's coming up next, structure really does really well with basically all kids, but it does especially well with kids that are atypical and that their brain is wired that way. And that actually brings a point to I've had a lot of questions from the kids yesterday about time, and once something is mentioned, they obsess over it. The special needs kid, oh, we're going to do this thing, and they will ask about it every single day before it happens. So that would help kind of let them know, like a countdown to when things will be happening, or just not mentioning it before the day of. That's another option. So, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.